our next guest also in this panel is Marci Zaroff from ecofashion, who also coined that term ecofashion, I think back in 1995 or something like that, so a long time ago. And well, you are an author and a serial entrepreneur, and I can't even read out all the things that you have done, but I think the most important thing really is that you are a pioneer of this field, and you are spreading over the whole range of kind of communications with books, with and with your own ecofashion corporation. Thank you. And then finally, we also have Marian here from Denim. And well, he's also an entrepreneur. I'm not sure how serial yet, but for sure very serious. Because he founded Denim, which is the only brand that on the Fair Wear brand score has 100 points. That is quite remarkable, I think. And well, the background idea of Denim was to do it yourself, I think. I mean, to not produce for other companies anymore, but for their own brand. And it's a supply chain between, in that sense, Europe and Vietnam, I believe. And they sell a lot of denim, some of the most sustainable denim on this planet at the moment, I guess. That is definitely worse. And now I didn't properly introduce you yet. You're a researcher at the Metabolic Institute, and well, basically you apply systems thinking, which we always also like to do here in different formats, to shifting dynamics of the local, regional, and global values. So you also like on a very broad spectrum there, and that's, I think, and you look obviously into supply chains, value chains, and the associated technologies. So I think in this panel we have really three, again, very different stakeholders, and I think three stakeholders that can help us really to look into that global perspective, which is then the finishing point for this day today, obviously. And I would like to start this with a positive note, because that's, I think, is one of the important things, as I mentioned before. We do need also positive visions, and we said the summit here is all about regenerative fashion, but also about implementing positive impact, which basically we hope to do through regenerative fashion. So my first question to you would be, what does positive impact actually mean to you?
So I think the potential of the fashion industry having a positive impact is actually quite huge because of the long and interweaved supply chain with all that complexity, which is on one side a massive challenge, but on the other side it's also a great opportunity to actually touch a lot of people, a lot of countries, a lot of industries, and so that would be my stand of what could the fashion industry actually have as a positive impact. Sorry, I hear myself talking at the same time, so it's a little bit difficult to focus on what I'm saying. But I hope I brought that across.
Yes, I think you did. I mean, at least I heard it fairly well. Well, then maybe we kind of go over to you for the moment, and I hope that we get the sound problems done. So, yeah, what would it mean for you? I mean, obviously, it's a very broad question, but like the fashion industry always wanted to be positive. I mean, basically, fashion lives from being positive in a communicative way. But what do you believe could it be in a real way? Like, what is kind of the purpose it may be getting in the near future?
Yeah, I mean, there are several different impact areas that we will definitely have to address. The first one, I think, and a very important one for me, is the fashion industry has to actively contribute and help support ecosystem functions. And this covers not only carbon sequestration, but also water quality, biodiversity, really spanning across these different environmental impact areas that obviously, as it's been mentioned previously, all contribute to a sort of interconnected system. So really supporting this actively is going to be a huge role across every industry, not just the fashion industry. I also think a fashion industry should contribute to the shifting mindset, so really moving away from this burden shifting idea as well. So really a lot of the impact from the fashion industry is hidden to the consumer, and actually really making everyone along the supply chain accountable, making it very transparent, making sure that people are connected with the products that they are purchasing as well. And for me, these would be two very core impact areas. I think we should be focusing on.
Makes total sense to me. I'm not sure like how far we gotten with the technical sound issues here now, so I'm a bit shying to ask our fabulous guest over there, but maybe we can try it again. I mean, Marci, have you heard us more or less? So what would be your take on like what could be the most important kind of positive impact coming from the industry?
Yeah, well, I've always considered myself a soil junkie. So I would say, you know, looking at cotton, which represents a third of our textiles out there, you know, how can we be a part of the solution versus the problem? And really look at connecting agriculture to popular culture through regenerative and organic practices, you know, which is truly sustainable cotton, you know, as many companies in the industry have been making commitments, you know, we're going to be 100% sustainable cotton by X date. But, you know, today cotton is, you know, one of the most heavily sprayed industries in agriculture. We've degraded and depleted the soil in a very significant way through the several decades. And many people might not realize this, but soil is one of our greatest solutions to climate change, because when we have healthy soil, we actually have the ability to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere versus reflect it back up. Not to mention all the other benefits of having healthy soil and biodiversity and healthy ecosystems. We can actually see better water retention, and ultimately in the end, better quality crops, right? So I think I happen to be, you know, very passionate about connecting the dots of the whole lifestyle. I'm the author of a book called Eco Renaissance, co-creating a stylish, sexy, and sustainable world. And, you know, many people have already been all over the world, have embraced, you know, a healthier lifestyle when it comes to food. And so I would say, you know, having lived for the last 30 years at the intersection of food and fashion, that, you know, it's time now with Maslow that we go from our first basic need of, you know, food and what we put in our bodies to our second basic need, which is shelter and clothing, and connecting the dots between being, you know, being a part of the solution by voting with our dollars, and also as an industry looking at how do we start from the ground up, from the source, and build up the supply chain so that we can not only have that full transparency that today's consumer is demanding, but we can also start with fibers and materials, which, you know, is very metaphoric for, I think, what's happening all over the world, especially coming off of the pandemic, where we weren't going outside, we were going inside back to our own source to reset our priorities and think differently about the products, the companies, and the brands we're supporting today, and looking at, you know, again, metaphorically, how do we start at the source, go beyond farm to table, and look at farm to fashion. So that's a big piece. And then the second piece, other than regenerative and organic agriculture, is really looking at circularity and regenerative systems in manufacturing, which I'm sure we'll speak about more during this panel. But, you know, the benefits now of really the cradle to cradle mindset. What we take from the earth, we need to give back to the earth, right? Looking through the lens of, you know, material health, material reuse, water stewardship, renewable energy, and social justice.
Yes, I think we probably all agree. I mean, yes, you're getting a quick applause here.
Trying.
Maybe I can forward an additional question to Marian. You have your own supply chain, so you can kind of really directly kind of look at least parts of it, I think. Obviously, a supply value chain is maybe much longer than what you own of that part, but I think you are in a special position. You have a lot of transparency there, more than many other brands. So how is your footprint? Do you think there could ever be, for your products, a positive footprint coming out of your activities, or are you more on the goal, well, let's be neutral at least? How is that if you look concretely like into the value chain, the supply?
First, I think I need to say a few words. You claimed that we are one of the most sustainable brands out there in the market. I would never say that. And one of the reasons is because we simply don't have the data. And I think that's one of the main problems and main issues we have out there. And I was listening to very inspiring panel talks on your summit. So congratulations to all the panelists before. in the same time, they were a bit intimidating because they also showed me what I don't know, especially when it comes to regenerative soil and farming cotton, replacing it with lychee. That's what I heard before. That was the first time I actually was listening to it. So I think for us it's important to say how this brand was actually born. I founded a factory, never having the intention of owning a factory, and I founded a brand with never intending to owning a brand. And it was kind of the next necessary step of becoming and creating sustainable business model. And I think in the center of this sustainable business model are the people, are the humans. And we're talking a lot about positive impact, and we often connect that to CO2 footprinting. But what we have listened to the panelists before, Industry We Want and Namza and her organization in Bangladesh, in the same time, we're talking about Algiers and super innovative materials. And, there's a massive gap here between super innovative technologies, a lot of startups, and the real world outside there. And the real world is that we fashion brands until now are unable to commit. How do we calculate actually living wage? So there are different living wage calculators out there, but the brands until now have not been able to kind of agree on one. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but it was important to get that out there for me, because for me this positive impact is ultimately, of course, it is connected to the planet, but it's not gonna last, or it's not gonna be sustainable if we neglect how many people are actually involved. And that's what I meant with how and what kind of positive impact the fashion industry could have because of our storytelling potential, because of this interweaved multi-global supply chain. I think it would be great if the fashion industry would start collaborate more and start inspiring other industries by being honest about also things which don't work out at this stage, and tackle it together. Sorry, you might want to repeat your question.
No. This time I won't repeat my question. But your answer was very, very nice. And yeah, I mean, you're very humble always, I feel. But that's also something that this industry can really well need, especially in the areas of when talking about value chains and who really is sustainable. Obviously, we've been talking before about like how data might be a weapon against greenwashing, and this is a very important topic. I think one that we're not going to have right now to go deeper into that, but obviously it is very difficult to claim anything actually at the moment. And I mean, on Thursday we're going to have also a debate on that together with Luke Haverhals from Natural Fibers Welding, and it's all the question like, okay, how do you even measure impact at the moment? And yeah, we're not that far as an industry, I believe, but maybe, Savanna, you can also tell us a little bit more about that kind of point of view, because you also analyze, obviously, and what, from your point of view, what is the main aspects that need to be taken into account when wanting to implement positive impact? I mean, you already mentioned the impact areas, but like, what would be things that you can say, well, this is kind of maybe tools or methods?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, maybe also to pick up on what Marian was saying about this lack of available data, which I think is covering many different topics in environmental science as well, as like, where do we actually get this data on fresh water, on carbon, on nutrient cycles, these sorts of key topics. I think, but from the perspective of Metabolic, we do a lot of work with cities and municipalities and stakeholders within cities to really build their capacity to monitor impact as well. And this is really a key part of this data gathering process. So really what we do is try and co-create different methodologies, really try and understand the baselines of how cities are consuming materials and the sort of impacts that are associated to those. then what we do is work with the city to actually implement circular interventions and regenerative interventions as well. And then we go forward to really use those performance indicators and those metrics that have been co-designed and collaboratively decided upon with city stakeholders, and actually then go, okay, we're measuring from the baseline, how far have you got, what has worked, what hasn't, what could we improve on? And actually this sort of on the ground, it's not only about during, for example, the scale of a 4-year project, going through this process with them, but also then giving them the tools to then continue monitoring their impact and continue building and scaling different interventions.
Wow, and you do that on a city level. So in that sense, I guess it also helps because it's like an ecosystem that's still, well, overseeable maybe to a certain degree.
You can,
even though I'm
you've
sure
got a bit of a smaller scope, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but that's a really important approach, I guess. So, yeah, how does that work? Can you translate then, or is that part of your idea that you kind of can translate at the end results from the smaller scale also to a global scale? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it's about really understanding, so you have sort of technological interventions, you also have sort of social interventions, this sort of thing. But it's really about understanding, okay, what are the enabling conditions for scaling those as well? So really what we would like to do is sort of start creating a set of blueprints and really use these for further replication and further scaling of these initiatives in other European cities as well.
Right. So
Can I
focus is Europe.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can I also ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
It's very abstract for me. I'm not really sure what you're measuring. Like you're measuring cities, but is it? I just want to. It's very abstract for me.
Yeah, of course. I can give you an example of one of the projects we've been working on. So we were part of the consortia for this project called Reflow, which is actually working with different European cities across different sectors. And what we were doing is within the Reflow project, really understanding the current state of material consumption and production within that city. So creating, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Sankey diagrams, but really creating a sort of material flow analysis, visualizing the information as well, because we feel this is kind of part of our work is really making the information accessible to different stakeholders. So really informing discussions, getting these stakeholders involved, understanding their own consumption and the impacts associated to that. And then with this information at hand, then really moving forward and proposing and co-designing different interventions. So for example, in Amsterdam, they were really focusing in the textile sector and really looking at how could we apply different reuse initiatives, different collection and sourcing initiatives, like really bringing a collection of different interventions together. And now what we're doing is going through the process of, okay, we had that baseline of we understand how material is being consumed and the impacts associated, what difference have those made? And then really building out a roadmap for those interventions that do seem plausible and feasible for the city to actually, activate and realize.
Right.
I understand a little bit.
That's a starting point. You are already connected in a certain way. That's obviously also why we do this panel. So please always ask. I was wondering, because I know there's, for example, in the US, there's Accelerating Circularity as a program that is not focusing on cities, but like on, let's say, regional material flows. Marci, do you know do you know kind of similar initiatives in the US that are also kind of taking first maybe a local focus, but then also trying to scale from there?
Yeah, well, I think there are a lot of efforts going on around collaboration. I always say, 1 + 1 = 11, right? We're stronger together than we are apart. And I think that, what's really going to drive this industry forward is a mindset around cooperation versus competition. And so organizations like the Textile Exchange, right, where there's a big contingent in the US, there's also obviously a lot of members and constituents overseas and in Europe and Asia and all over the world. And we're all working together to drive this change and make these commitments that we're going to have a 45% reduction in our carbon footprint by 2030. And I think, it's going to take all hands on deck to really get us there, both local and global. And I think one thing that we've all seen during the pandemic is, from a risk mitigation standpoint, the need to have a foot in both of those those areas as a company, as a brand, as someone in the industry, because at the end of the day, we've had supply chain and logistical issues over the last 2 years that are really unprecedented. And so, in going back to kind of the intersection of local and global is how do we build more efficiency in our supply chains? And in some ways while addressing our carbon footprints, in some ways that means really, again, starting at the local source and on a parallel path, also building globally. I don't think it's one or the other. I know with MetaWare, my company, we're kind of an intel inside of sustainable fashion. We build and manage supply chains around the world with a big focus in India, where our core office is. But we've seen a lot of demand from our partners to onshore back to the US to have that risk mitigation component, to have that foot, on boots on the ground here. So we're looking at all kinds of hybrid ways to make sure that we can be efficient, because as most of us know, a garment can change hands sometimes 7 to 10 times in a supply chain, right? And when we're talking about sustainability, it just gets that much more complicated to manage a supply chain from the ground up, and to navigate all those complexities. So, in a way, what we're trying to figure out is what are the things that we can best globally, and what are the things we can do best locally, and from a strategic lens, have a foot in both of those, manufacturing platform marketplaces.
Thanks. Yeah,
and I think when you talk about circularity, I think that's another piece of this that is, super important, because of course, as we look at the new, very disruptive business models that are happening out there in the US, the Real and Rent the Runway and, Renewal Workshop, and, you need to have an arm locally to offset the original productions that were global in order to repurpose, restore, remake, and recycle.
Yeah, anyway, I think you nearly mentioned a few of my favorite buzzwords, like pre-competitive collaboration. At least last year, that was one of my favorite buzzwords. And then it leads me also to one of my really still favorite buzzwords, glocalization, where I feel that is kind of really the way forward, or one of these many aspects of the way forward. And interestingly, nowadays I read everywhere also like luxury brands are already becoming like hyper local, and at the same time obviously still being global players. And I feel this is also something that will be relevant for nearly the whole fashion industry on many different ways. I'm not just talking about the marketing, which may be the first layer for luxury brands there right now, but also in terms of, okay, how do you communicate, and how do you organize your relationships? You have local relationships with customers, you have global relationships with your value chain, etc. So I guess this needs to be reorganized a bit, and that in a time where everything is under pressure. It feels like one crisis after the other. And not even just the huge crises that we have right now, but the last couple of years already have been difficult for many supply chains, and now pandemic and now a war on top are really disrupting everything. So what do you feel like? What is the new role then for fashion brands in all this environment? A company like Denim, from my point of view, is already very progressive and anyway an agile player. But as you said yourself, also still needs to learn a lot, etc. Because we don't know enough, we don't have enough data. But yeah, what is now the opportunities? Maybe first of all for brands and suppliers to kind of go into new relationships. What do you think on a global and local level?
Me?
Maybe you, yes.
Okay. I don't know. Did that actually change? I think fashion always kind of has been local in a way. You always had, at least for a lot of brands, they had their production somewhere in a production country, and the POS, the point of sale in other countries. So I think what we need to come to understand is that the big problems of our world we can only solve locally, because we kind of need to do what we have to do local, as well as being aware about our responsibility overseas. It's, for me, what is really interesting, I didn't know about, I forgot the name, Savanna, sorry, about your institution that you're actually consulting with cities. It's super interesting, this local aspect for brands like us who are not as huge as H&M and others who can collect, products and bring them back to their supply chain. It would be really interesting because we depend a lot on collaborative efforts from retailers, from stores, actually to either ensure the longevity of a product through repair or secondhand, or like bringing it back to life. We can't do that on our own. And I think that's the interesting and challenging part, which then brings me back to data, because it would be really interesting to see, is it worthwhile for us as a brand to spend our limited budget and time into developing new materials or into a second-hand concept to ensure the longevity of a product is longer? What actually does have the more positive impact here? And this is, I think, sorry to bring that up again, the topic, this holistic view on how to measure and how you create science-based targets, and you really follow them up, and you're not only focusing on CO2. There are the various areas to look at, and in the end, you as a brand, you might need to make the decision what you want to focus first. I think that's coming for all of us, and that's an opportunity, but at the same time, of course, it's very challenging. As I said, the panel speakers before were very inspiring, but intimidating as well, because they know so much which I don't, and that makes me nervous. But I'm really happy to see those kind of consultation and initiatives on a local level, and maybe we as a brand are just not that well connected. Marci, you mentioned there's this huge collaboration. To be honest, I don't feel that. Maybe I'm connected to the wrong people, or I'm not connected at all. I lived too long in Vietnam. It's just, I feel our industry still didn't get it. I think it's about having your unique selling point, scaling up, rather than using swarm intelligence in order to solve problems together. But yeah, I'm happy to be here to get connected to the right people potentially.
That's, as I said, part of what we want to do anyway. Maybe just a small comment. I think you're totally right. Fashion has always been global, but I think not so consciously. And I think it has been kind of local in one way. Now it's more both ways, etc. So, but Marci, how do you see like this globalization of fashion? Like, do you see a difference there?
Yeah, well, just building off, one of my favorite quotes, right? We can't solve today's problems with the same consciousness that created them. That's, Albert Einstein. And I think it really is sort of a springboard into people are sort of changing their consciousness around what matters, right? And, fibers and materials and chemical inputs, right? We're not just what we put in our bodies, we're what we put on our bodies, right? There's this change that's happening at the consumer facing level, which is now, locally putting pressure on the local retailers, who are then in turn responding almost like a domino effect, looking for, solutions to what today's consumer, especially millennials, are seeking. Transparency around, more conscious products that are socially and environmentally accountable, right? So I think technology has really changed the game in our movement. And I've been, I missed my intro because of some of the tech glitches, but, I've been in the world of, sustainable fashion now for almost 30 years, having, coined the term eco-fashion in 1995. So back then, we were super limited in, what we could do and how we could bring products to market. But I think today what's so exciting to me is, over the journey of the last, several decades, we've gone from, storytelling through mail order and then ultimately, point of purchase and packaging, which was super limited, to the internet really activating consumers around pulling the curtain back and being able to ask the questions: who made my clothes? How are they being made? What's in them? Driven by the fashion revolution movement, of course, that was born, coming off the Rana Plaza tragedy. And I think that awareness has been an incredible catalyst for new technology and innovation. And so today, I would say the solution to having sort of a foot in both local and global is to really take advantage of some of the new technologies. I can say in America, and I started my company MetaWare as a U.S. manufacturer, because I did see that there was a need for, sort of onshoring and, reshoring and having a sort of local, stake. But we couldn't scale our business years ago because we were so behind from all the innovation that's been going on, for the last decade or more in Asia. And so I think what we're seeing now and what's, happened as a result of, the pandemic is a lot of investment going into these new smart technologies, direct to garment printing, 3D, robotics, conversations in AI, but really at the end of the day, looking for ways to be more efficient, and to, not have to, again, in the US, labor has always been our greatest challenge in terms of the costs, and then how the consumer has been sort of trained with fast fashion to want, price has been a big driving force for them. And I think where they're now looking differently through a more conscious lens, today's consumer, is value is not just about price, right? It's about this sort of trifecta of, doing well by doing good. What is that brand or product doing for the world, as in addition to a great price and a great, quality or style. So I think that the rules have changed, the game has changed, and now we're really seeing a demand for, lean manufacturing and on-demand production and customization, and you can't do that globally, right? It's so there again. It goes back to the balance of being able to meet today's consumers' demands at the same time, with smart technology, at the same time that we're able to scale, through what already exists overseas to really build, that sort of that balancing act.
Right, thank you. Consumer demands nowadays, I'm afraid, are also like hyper fastness and these kind of things. At least, probably they believe it's part of their demands nowadays, since they've been taught that it's possible and that you can get things delivered in 1 hour to your doorsteps and these kind of things. So how do you see that if we talk about localization and technology and what are enablers and what has changed? What do you feel? What is the kind of the changes that happens or are happening already now? I mean, without maybe looking too far in the future, but what do you see happening right now already or next couple 2-3 years?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just to go back to this whole like globalization versus localization. I think globalization also has many different faces. We have seen through current events how fragile our global economy is, how interdependent we are on different supply chains, how vulnerable they are to shifting dynamics politically, economically, and also sort of, but like on the other side of that, really the sort of value of this awareness building, and also like I guess sort of huge cultural alignment that comes through globalization as well. So fashion obviously is one of these huge rapidly changing influences, and I think it has a lot of power there. This is where the power lies. We really need to start sharing the knowledge of best practices, not only at the beginning of the supply chain in the way that we design, but also going throughout the supply chain as well, like right up until end of life. Because I think this is another one of really horrible symptoms of globalization, is we end up with pockets of waste where no one really feels responsible for handling that. And especially for textiles, we're seeing this in the global south. And I think really what comes along with the sort of local perspective is, as Marci said, it's like redefining value as well. So really looking, okay, what are designers putting in terms of imagination, in time, in creativity, in collaboration? How are people like valuing the sort of trust along supply chains? And then also when it comes to end of life, really, okay, how are we then going to redefine those materials at the end of their life as well? So rather than going towards, for example, incineration or to landfill, how could we then repurpose those on a local scale as well?
Perfect point at the end, because that's what I wanted to maybe question. I just put it out there, and we can see how it's going to be answered. Do we need kind of especially new local technology kind of that is focused on these kind of local solutions for a global industry?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think so. I mean, I think there's going to be, with all of these technologies, there are some that work more efficiently when they're decentralized. Also, when you have a lot more sort of citizen science, community engagement, really looking at sort of, fabrication labs, this sort of thing. But there are
collecting probably,
exactly,
the whole take-back
collecting,
thing.
sorting, yeah, definitely, for sure. But then I think there are also technologies that work maybe better, slightly more centralized as well. I mean, this is what we've been finding as part of the Design for Decomposition initiative, is really, okay, which technologies work best at what scale? How are they going to contribute towards green job creation? How are they going to contribute towards actually achieving the regenerative economy that we want to see? Because it's all well and good saying, okay, we can put a certain technology there and it will give us this output, but is this actually feeding back into other industries that could potentially use it, feeding back into, like a regenerative, holistic system?
Right.
And I just... Yeah. Sorry, I was going to just add to, the kind of connectivity of local and global is this idea of, driving transparency through, as I was speaking to technology, also blockchain and QR code technology, which allows for us to connect source to story and really kind of a phase one, again, with ecofashionCORP, which is we call it a greenhouse of brands. Two of our brands, Yes and Seed to Style, just launched this QR code technology, which take the local consumer on a journey of the product from its inception, from the farm to every single touch point in the supply chain as a phase one. Meet your farmers and your factory workers. I always joke that funny, not funny, but our clothing is not growing in the department store, right? People's lives are being affected. And I think, again, it goes back to that demand from today's consumer wanting to see, the stories behind their products, who's making them and how are they being made. So having that technology that can then, show what are all the inputs in the product, what are the certifications, what are the, who are the people that are growing and sewing our products, and elevating farmers and factory workers along our supply chains through these storytelling platforms and technologies. And the next chapter of blockchain, which is really exciting, and again, connecting global and local, is impact data, going back to what we were speaking to before, which is how can we then translate the impacts, the water, energy, waste, chemical use, carbon capture, water retention, all of these layers, social justice, farmer livelihoods, fair pay, and bring that data up the supply chains so that, again, that journey can be measured. And then ultimately, we have a set of metrics in the industry to hold, companies accountable to the things that they're saying. And we've got to move away from, which I think has already started to happen, sustainability being a marketing proposition. That's where it used to be. I mean, a lot of these efforts were driven by marketing departments back in the day. And today they're really driven by design, product development, sourcing, production, who are in the trenches making real change happen, whether it's global or local. But I think that connectivity is super important, just as creativity and collaboration and community and consciousness. Those are kind of the fundamentals of, I believe, in this paradigm shift that we're all experiencing.
Yes. Always a lot to process first, but I would tend to agree. How can we now come? I mean, first of all, it's we are slowly coming to an end to this panel, but we still have a few minutes. If somebody in the audience has a question, you can already kind of write it down in your mind and kind of say it out loud, maybe in around 5 minutes, just to prepare you. How do we? I mean, what do we do now? How can we use this kind of global machinery, the fashion industry, or maybe it is already a global machinery, and get into the regenerative economy? What is kind of the most important key elements there? I don't know, who is somebody, I mean, Marian, I think you were shying away a little bit, even though you have all this practical experience in this whole thing. So maybe you could start by letting us know what is kind of in your business at the moment with your factory and your brand. What is the biggest hurdles for you to become way more sustainable than you possibly are already, even if you can't measure it?
I think one of the key challenges is to identify the right focus, because it's hard. There are so many areas you could focus on. Marci just mentioned, QR codes, and we do that. We're working with Retraced. You can scan the QR code to see the supply chain. The truth is, nobody really does. And we invested there a lot of time, and we try to introduce this to our B2B consumers as well as B2C. We have another QR code on our products where you can actually tip the worker directly. So you can scan the QR code. We're working with a Berlin startup called Tip Me Together. This actually works. So the emotional side, and that's, I think it's easier to understand, it's easier to grab. And those kind of things we do experience. So the biggest challenge for us is how to actually identify the right focus in order to go full throttle with all resources in this window of opportunity to solve one thing after the other. And that's very challenging for me, to be honest. It might be also my lack of strategic thinking and managing my team, but that's definitely a big challenge for us. So we sometimes jump around, and we were break even in 2020. We in 2021, because of the lockdown in Europe as well as in Vietnam, 3 months lockdown, we lost. We brought everybody through in Vietnam. We made sure we pay our salaries, and we made sure we pay, even though we had huge order cancellation discounts requests from other brands. And that's time consuming and mind consuming. A lot of those initiatives, I feel sometimes we're too small. We have that ideas, and the ideas are great. It's just like, how do you translate that into reality if you're not even able to, identify for one or the other material the farmer? We are stuck at the trader. We're working with Cotton Connect to get us through, but we're not getting through. And we're stuck at the trader who trades cotton like another commodity, and we're stuck. And there are so many areas which we as a brand feel sometimes overwhelmed. I understand you always try to find the positive angle to it, and it's just that's for us the reality check. I think surely from design perspective, from material perspective, we want to design and develop and produce as circular as possible. That means we're testing things. We're trying to avoid recycled polyester thread and just discovering it doesn't work for denim. We try to introduce non-plastic lines with hemp and organic cotton to discover that stretch is still required. We jumped on the train to replace spandex with biodegradable materials from cornstarch, but it's always a huge investment, and it's the long-term studies are still missing. So it's a challenging process. That's what I can share.
Yeah, but that's, I think, great. Thanks a lot for your honesty and your openness, because I think it is very. You're getting an applause.
Thank you.
because I think it's very important. I mean, you are a mid-sized business or small, medium-sized business enterprise somewhere there. I guess I don't know your numbers, but it's complicated. I mean, the corporates are not doing it. They also have the problems of investing. They would have the money, but they always claim the shareholders don't want it, etc. Maybe it's slowly changing now. But then the small players that really want to do the change and invest, they don't really get there for many different reasons. I mean, my favorite answer is obviously, well, let's collaborate more. But I also know that's also very time consuming. Communication is very needed there. And obviously it's not that easy to do that at the end. I do hope that maybe we can also connect you to a few more people to kind of help bringing your brand forward, obviously. But yeah, maybe we can get like some last comments here. Maybe first from you, Savanna, like what could you either advise to Marian, or what would be kind of your approach on what is kind of the most important keys now or the hurdles on the way?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, maybe just in response to what Marian said, it is going to be a challenge. This whole thing is going to be a challenge. We're going to have to keep working at it. We're going to have to keep finding new alternatives. I mean, I think this is part maybe of the value of experimentation and trying things at a local level, is you have a much smaller system to actually trial something. And then you get much faster feedback loops in terms of whether it's worked, what needs to be improved, who needs to be involved. And really testing this at a local scale is incredibly valuable then for other people who are going through the same experiences as you. And I think this is then where the global level comes in, and the global networks is really about sharing this knowledge and transferring it to other people who are trying to replicate the same best practices. And we'll get there eventually. It's going to take some time, but I think really trying to stimulate people attempting to do this and attempting to try and attempting to experiment is going to be incredibly valuable, and that's what's going to push us forwards.
Great, yeah. Also very deserved. I also always think we are in a time where experimentation is the only thing we can do in a way. Nobody knows the solution, and we need plenty of solutions. Marcia, what would be your take on this? Or can you also advise something to Marian, since we already like, he's very open-minded to listen to us, I think.
Yeah, well, first, the journey of 1,000 miles, right, begins with one step, right? Lao Tzu, one step at a time. Don't get overwhelmed, because you're right, there's so many spokes in the wheel of, change in this industry. And relatively speaking, and as long as I've been doing this, I feel like we're still at our infancy as an industry, really. And so there's just so much innovation that's happening. So I would definitely say, number one, tap into some of the global collaborations like the Textile Exchange, the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. I mean, there are a number of organizations that are driving change in the industry. As a small to mid-sized company, probably more the Textile Exchange. Looking at number one, it's not about doing less harm. It's about doing more good, right? So when you're building your products from, the beginning, think through design differently. Start there and really think about what are the fibers and materials you're sourcing. And an easy, shift is to say, all right, well, if we're using a lot of cotton in our products, let's look at more regenerative or organic cotton, right? If we're using, polyester and we need for function wear, look at RPET in terms of obviously, plastic bottles taken out of landfills. I mean, 25 million bottles already taken out by Unify, Reprieve. I'm more a fan of natural fibers, frankly, and I saw you kind of but because of the proliferation of microfibers in our ecosystem, right? But that's actually a testament to, and I'm glad you kind of nodded there, because the truth is we have evolved for, as an industry, the microfiber issue of every synthetic garment in the history of mankind is shedding microfibers into our ecosystems, into our water, our washing machines, into our rivers, and then into our oceans, right? Which, that is just a kind of a red flag around, we need to be driving more natural fibers, and then ultimately circularity and stop producing virgin, synthetics, and look at, there's enough synthetics out there in our landfills and all, in the world to now start to build more innovation around what do we do with what already exists to, again, minimizing some of the impacts that, have occurred in as we've gone from, 2 or 4 seasons a year to 52 seasons a year, right? Design with more durability, obviously. And that really comes back to, again, fibers and materials and what we're using. And then, look at partnering, collaboration we keep talking about, but, MetaWare is a resource. I mean, that's why I created the company, to be a solution provider to help meet you where you are and take you on this journey, right? And to make it easier because it is so complex. And then, as we continue to evolve as an industry, again, we go from certifications, which are mapping our supply chains, and they're not perfect. They're better, not perfect. Right? There's always, in any system, there's going to be, companies that maybe take missteps and then that affects everybody. But in the end, it is a system that is built on transparency. And that is so fundamental to everything we're speaking to in terms of the paradigm shift of our industry, because we're only as good as, the real work that we're doing. And going back to what I said before, this is not about telling the story without doing the work. It's really not storytelling, it's story doing that we have to be looking at. And with that, there's a lot of amazing effort that's going on. And the next frontier really is digitizing our data, going back to what you said before, so that we can see, what our collective impact are, our progress, and how we can, that will continue to empower us. And then the last piece I'll say is there are a lot of plugins that are happening. I know over here, as an example, there's a company called Recurate that we plugged into our Shopify at Yes And, which is actually built an outsourced resale program for us. So now when people buy Yes And product, they can actually return it virtually and use that credit for a next product, and someone else can get the, in a secondhand market. We call it Yes And Repeat. So there's a lot of really great things out there that you can just plug and play on, rather than trying to kind of reinvent the wheel. And then the last thing I'll say is, we've started a farm project at MetaWare called Reset, which stands for Regenerate the Environment, Society, and Economy through Textiles. And that's our cotton program that's in India that has 3 tracks: organic, regenerative, and biodynamic now. The regenerative is in conversion to organic. So, I think as you get involved in organizations like the Textile Exchange, you'll see that there are more resources out there that can help streamline our supply chains and our processes, connecting source to story.
Right.
Right. I'm afraid I wanted to have like a question from the audience, but we would have to be very, very quick. Is there any question here in the live audience? Yes, we have one. Can we play that very, very quickly? There is the lady, please, because we have to really finish very soon.
So hi, I'm Ulrike. I'm also founding a startup right now in the terms of developing sustainable material for the supplies for the fashion industry. So for all the small parts, we're usually made out of fossil-based plastic. And in these terms, I think it's very interesting to also think about how to include industrial waste from all kind of areas. And what I just wanted to ask is what you think would be that role in the future in fashion industry, because to me that's also a source which is traceable and which we can use really easily and include it into new materials. So yeah.
Very good question, I would say, actually. We only have like 30 seconds each maximum to answer this, which is...
I cannot answer.
Who would
30
like
seconds.
to start?
I can start. Yeah, really great question. And I think this is something we've also been exploring as part of the D4D initiative. Really, there is so much variability in waste and also the feedstocks that you are getting coming via waste. I agree it is a source that we should definitely be tapping into, not just because of its potential, but because of the degradation that it is causing to local ecosystems currently. And I think what we are trying to do is also explore, okay, what existing technologies are out there where we could potentially leverage this waste as well, not only for the fashion industry, but also for a variety of different sectors. So I think it is definitely something worth exploring, for sure. I think it's also just about understanding, okay, you will have a variability for sure in your feedstock. But if you can get the data on that, then yeah, I mean, it sounds like a great initiative.
Well, I think that was pretty good answer in very short time, actually. I don't know if you want to add something, but besides that, I know, Marci, you also need to leave, so I don't want to stretch this really too far. So it was a pleasure to have you. I would love to have like a very, very last short mini statement, one sentence on what you think is now from your perspective like the most important thing to implement positive impacts. Could you give me one sentence on that, and then I'll let you go and we'll finish our summit.
Wow. No, I would just say at a high level, we all need to, wear the change we wish to see in the world, which to me really comes from, climbing that ladder of consciousness and looking through the lens of regeneration, circularity, and technology. Was that quick enough?
Marian,
just in summary.
I squeeze something out of you? One last sentence?
All right. Unfortunately, I can't say anything about this production waste because that would be a positive ending for me. Never mind. My sentence is, it's basically, we all said that before. I think collaboration and commitment from brand towards the supply chain is definitely beats competition, and that's what I would like to invite, whoever, whether it's a startup who is out there trying to not do the same mistakes I did, or Marci with her initiatives. I think that's great, and I really wish to see more of that.
And then you have the final words.
Oh, wow.
Or the final sentence.
Yeah, for me, I think it's about really bridging all these amazing initiatives that are going on right now. There is so much going on, so much great stuff. But now it's about really bringing people together to share that knowledge, to share that information, and really build that collective action moving forward.
Thanks so much, everybody. It was lovely having you all here, online, offline. It's amazing to have people back again on stage, in the audience. I'm super happy. Thanks for this wonderful first day. So much good content and a few good questions also. Amazing. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.